Good evening, everybody. My name is E.R. Anderson. I'm the executive director of Charis Circle. Charis Circle is the nonprofit programming arm of Charis Books, and Charis Books is the South's oldest independent feminist bookstore. We are thrilled to be here tonight with the one and only Nikky Finney celebrating Donika Kelly's brand new book, The Renunciations, hot off the presses. Today is launch day. We are so excited. This is going to be, I know, a transformative and mind-opening conversation, so I want to get right to it. Nikky Finney was born by the sea in South Carolina and raised during the civil rights, Black Power, and Black arts movements. She is the author of On Wings Made of Gauze, Rice, The World is Round, and Head Off and Split, which won the National Book Award for Poetry in 2011. Her new collection of poems, Love Child's Hotbed of Occasional Poetry, was released from Tri-Quarterly Books and Northwestern University Press in 2020. And we are here tonight with Donika Kelly, who is the author of Bestiary, the winner of the 2015 Cave Canem Poetry Prize, the 2017 Hurston Wright Award for Poetry, and the 2018 Kate Tufts Discovery Award. She teaches at the University of Iowa, had her last day of classes today, and is here tonight to celebrate with all of us. Real quick, for all of you watching at home, we want to shout out the Auburn Avenue Research Library, who is here with us dropping knowledge in the chat. If you would like to ask a question, click the Ask a Question box in the bottom center of your screen, and feel free to put any questions there. We will get to them towards the end. And finally, let us know where you're watching from. Feel free to quote your favorite lines, clap. You know, we want this to feel like you're watching in your living room, or really in the living room at Charis all together. So we're so glad you're here. And it's a real joy to get to have y'all both launching at Charis tonight. So welcome, and let's take it away.
All right, thank you, ER, and thank everyone for coming out. I have some thank yous. I wrote them down on a piece of paper because I'm nervous. So thank you everyone for joining us, for taking time out on a Tuesday to hear some poems and join our conversation. I want to say a big thank you to Charis for hosting the launch, to Grey Wolf. This is what the notes are for, so I don't forget anybody. But especially Jeff, Schatz, Chance, Erilyn, who were just really wonderful and careful with the work. I felt really safe working with them, and that felt, I don't know, it shouldn't have felt surprising, but it did a little bit. And Fiona McCrae, Katie Dublinski, for helping get this cover, the Lorna Simpson cover, which was a dream. I'm very grateful to Casey O'Neill for answering all of my emails and mini requests, and Caroline Nitz, Chaina, just for, I don't know, just managing things. A big thank you to you, Nikky, for being in conversation with me, and to Phoebos, Melissa Phoebos, who is off screen in the corner over there, for helping me learn how to celebrate. I don't always know how to do that, and she's great at making space for celebration. So we really went to town on that grocery store sheet cake today, because that's how I celebrate. That's what I like to do. So I'm going to read some poems from the book. I'm going to start with the first poem, which has many things that I love, mostly fields, even though it's a bit of a sad poem. So we're just going to get into it. House of air, hours of fire. I was born into a house of air, my dad born to bear, to share his burden. I was his dominion, a bit of land turned to use. Where he plowed, I was worn, and where worn, I strained. I knew little of the life behind the hand that sounded me, that turned the field, that planted the maize. Yet I answered to his name as if it were my own. Then came the fallow, when I came into my body as a horse, as a bird, as a beetle scurrying in the brush. For many seasons, I was known by his name, but rarely worked by his hand. The field receded, overgrown. Then came the hours of fire, her joy at taking at my taking her name, one given to her mother and taken by her, the undergrowth charred to ash. In the distance, a house neither mine nor his. Was I happy? Happier, yes, to have some sky, to see the horizon, to want to know my body unworked. I've lived in the flame, practiced being incomplete, a progression, an action without place. I once thought it a carapace I shed, that house, that name, my time as a field. But I think of the fire, the brief time I will have held her name, this one shell taken for another, and I know I am palimpsest. I house the air, the earth, and flame, though nearly anything can be overwritten, and what can be left behind is no more or no less a matter of will. When I was at a one-day writing retreat for women in the Bay Area, and I wandered into this chapel, and there were these little girls decorating the pews. I had no idea what was going on. I was really not paying attention. I was not doing a good job sort of like putting the pieces together. And I realized they were decorating for a wedding. And that felt significant in some way. In the chapel of St. Mary's. I can't tell you what happened there, why I entered the sanctuary, a non-believer. Only that I have been thinking about worship, the altar of the body, and supplication for some time. My thoughts turn, as they often do in this season of absence, to my wife and how tired a God can get when called, and too often, for little reason but loneliness. Of course, I don't mean God here, but rather the woman I love, who alters the orbit of my life, pulls me with the density of light towards her, the draw thinner when she is farther away, as she is now. I try to find comfort in the inevitability of science when what I lack is faith. The sanctuary, the stained glass, 4 girls saturating it with soft chatter, small pots of stargazer lilies, a lace ribbon for each pew. This place is full of faith in the unknown, and I don't know how to believe in what I cannot see. Tonight, I will drive through the foothills and into the valley. I will try to make a little practice, to trust you are with me, even though you are somewhere else. Donika questions the oracle. Who hid my dad in the mountain, impoverished where he would remain, invisible and rationed, not on milk and honey, but on bologna and saltines until he grew strong enough to kill the father? Which father? Do I mean his daddy, exiled for the rest of his diabetic days to a closet in a house with no power, no water, where my dad, his sisters and brothers, caught for a time by the cracked rock and the pipe, lighting up in the dark, lived? Surely not his daddy, oracle. Surely not. How long was he the youngest? How long was he a child? What God swallowed him whole? The God perhaps who split his mother in two, or took his brother with a bullet from another father's gun in the sunlight in the afternoon? Did he really hold his dying brother's hand, oracle, the brother who wanted only an apology on my dad's behalf? Who held him when his mother died? Who told him of a heaven where dead mothers and brothers go? Oh, the pigeons. What of the pigeons, oracle? Did he tend them, watch them rise from the roof of the house with no power or water but a daddy in a closet, his sisters and brothers flaring in the rock light? Did he delight in their return? The pigeons, I mean. Did he ever delight, oracle, in anything a child might? Did he look for his name in the sky? Did he ride a bike made from junk parts in the south central LA sun fast as a boy might? Surely he did that, oracle. Surely that. And when he rose, like an improbable stone from the father's gut, whichever father I mean here, whichever father makes sense, the siblings, the pigeons, his daddy in exile, his name in the sky, when he rose with the stone of himself in his hand, covered in bile and mucus, free now of someone more powerful than the child he surely once was, did he know the terrible thing he would become? The next poem I'm going to read is one of my favorites. I love this poem so much. And part of what I love is the myth behind it. So when Perseus cuts off the head of Medusa, I'm going to go with Perseus. It could be Theseus. I can't keep those two dudes straight. I don't know that it matters that much. But when Perseus cuts off the head of Medusa at Athena's behest, I do remember that part. There's Pegasus. Like Pegasus comes out of Medusa's neck or springs from her blood. People are particular about like what version they like. Pegasus also has a sibling, and the sibling is either, so at the same time, so there's like a big horse and either a winged boar or a golden giant man. And if it's a golden giant, then that is the father of, and I believe the name is like Chrysaor or something like that. That golden giant is the father of Gerion, who tended the red cattle that Heracles stole, right? So I think that helps a little bit getting grounded in this poem. Portrait of my father as a winged boar. When his mother dies by metal turned slicing blade, from her blood springs my father, whose name I refuse to say as he refuses his father, the half-known man who sired him. In the dry LA light, the boy, my father, turns so that he is caught. One way, a winged boar. Another, a giant, a gold blade of a man. Both high-skulled, thick-maned, a juvenile without a sounder, a boy without a mother. He recognizes himself only in the man, carves himself into golden armor, but the rutting fact of him, the curved tooth, the thick neck, and beating wings, trembles beneath his skin. Whatever sheen the California sun burnishes out of his body, whatever good work his thickening hand compels, whatever woman he touches in the afternoon on the roof, he cannot deny his firstborn, his red fledgling, her many heads and hands, what he makes for her. A junk bike she loves, cattle, red in the field, a mirror, a red wreckage of her body. I'm going to read two more. I wrote the next poem I'm going to read in a workshop, generative writing workshop with Gabby Cavalcaresi. It was the second, or it came out of an exercise where Gabby asked us to go out and find something to look at and then describe it, like just like make notes of something outside. And there was this like cracked egg and there were flies in the egg. Sometimes when I talk to my students, I'm like, I'm very basic. I'm like, that was weird, the egg, and then the flies in it. I just like didn't expect that. It was in a place that was, you're not supposed to see eggs where I saw the egg. So this poem is titled, A Dead Thing That in Dying Feeds the Living. I've been thinking about the anatomy of the egg, about the two interior membranes, the yolk held in place by the chalazi, gases moving through the semi-permeable shell. A curious phrase, the anatomy of the egg, as if an egg were a body, which it is, as if an egg could be broken, then mended, which, depending on your faith, broken, yes, but mended? Well, best to start again with a new body, voided from a warmer one, brooded and turned. Better to begin as if some small-handed animal had knocked you against a rock, licked clean the rich yolk, and left the albumin to dry in the sun, as if a hinged jaw hadn't swallowed you whole. What I wanted, a practice that reassured that what was cracked could be mended or at least suspended so that it could not spread. But now I wonder, better to be the egg or scaled mandible, the small hand or the flies, bottle black and green, spilling their bile onto whatever's left, sweeping the interior, drinking it clean. I think something might have grown there, though I know it was never meant to be eaten. It was always meant to spoil. And this last poem, it's the last poem in the book. And I was talking with Sarah Nielsen, who's here doing an interview, and Sarah pointed out the first poem and the last poem both have houses, which I had not noticed. I just wanted to end on like a note that was like not sad. And this isn't a happy note, but it's a happier it's a hopeful note. I think. I also wrote this in a workshop with Gabby Calvocaresi in the same workshop. It was a very generative summer. So this poem is titled "The Moon Rose Over the Bay." I had a lot of feelings. The home I've been making inside myself started with a razing, a brush clearing, the thorn and nettle, the blackberry bush falling under the bush hog. Then I rested. A cycle fallow, said winter, said the ground is too cold to break pony, said I almost set fire to it all, lit a match, watched it ghost in the wind. Came the thaw, came the melting snowpack, the flooded river, new groundwater, the well risen. I stood in the mud field and called it a pasture. I stood with a needle in my mouth and called it a song. Everything rushed past my small ears. Were in the leaves, were in the wing and the wood. About time to get a hammer, I thought. About time to get a nail and saw. Thank y'all for listening. And for the comments in the chat. Y'all, it was Perseus, as it turns out. So,
wow, that was stunning as usual. Thank you for reading so beautifully from this new work. I just wanted to read some of the things that are being said about this new collection before we start talking. The Renunciations is a lion-hearted odyssey through the self, a casting aside of old mythologies and traumas in search of new stories fashioned from love and joy. The Renunciations is a book of resilience, survival, and the journey to radically shift one's sense of self in the face of trauma, moving between childhood marked by love and abuse and the breaking marriage of that adult child. Donika Kelly charts memory and the body as landscapes to be traversed and tended. These poems construct life rafts and sanctuaries. Donika Kelly, I'm so glad to be with you.
I'm so happy to be with you.
As they say, back to Vanderbilt, back to Tennessee, back to those days. And I wanted to start by talking about this cover.
Yes.
Can we start here? I
Yep.
mean, when you order the book, oh great community, when you order the book,
yeah.
Don't go fast. I know you want to get to the work. The work will be there. It's waiting on you. But in the shadows of this cover, sometimes we move too fast. I want you to see the words that have blue paint over them, almost. And I was thinking, Donika, that this is almost like a palimpsest.
Mm-hmm.
Literally, figuratively, metaphorically. I'm like, those are Donika's words. I know this. I know. Can you talk a little bit about? I mean, I when I saw this cover and I went close, I said, "This is in the right skin. There's nothing else these words could live in except this."
So I would say it was probably 2017 or 2018. Melissa and I went to a show in Chelsea, Hauser and Worth, Lorna Simpson's show. And there were these huge, like 9 feet tall, they were like enormous paintings. So there's like the collage element, which she likes. And so the words, I believe, are from like blown up strips from like issues of Ebony. And then there are these photos of the Arctic. And then there's like blue India ink, just like paint, like, and it felt with the first, like just walking in there, I was like, is this the Sublime? Like, am I near the ocean? But I was just like in a building, like in Chelsea, like it didn't make any sense at all. And I was stunned because it felt like, I mean, like exactly what you're saying, that palimpsest sense of things, that there was something under the ice, and what was under the ice was language, maybe. And I was really like, I saw Blue Dark, which is the image for the cover. There were a few others that I really love, but this one just like bowled me over, like it knocked me down. I felt so tiny next to it, and I really like that feeling of being tiny.
Oh, we're going to talk about that.
Okay.
In fact, let me use that as a segue. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to read something you wrote when we had a little back and forth back with the Los Angeles Review of Books, back for Bestiary. And you said, Nikky, I'm frightfully myopic. Perhaps this leads to a kind of granularity, a way of focusing on what is right in front of me. Perhaps this way of seeing is a way of being present. I can't see what will happen, only that something has happened and it's right here, so close to my face. I want to share what I see, to ask others to sit still and be beside me. So when I read,
I wrote that. That's wild.
those are your words.
Yes.
So to be tiny, I feel like this book could not have been written, Donika. What you have navigated here, the heart of a grown woman, which is broken or fractured or breaking, and sutured next to that heart of that girl, that daughter, which had to undergo so much trauma and so much pain. How do you bring these two disparate but not right worlds into the same atmosphere? When you did Bestiary, as a little bit of just a backstory, I remember you said, I wanted to have a book. I shuffled poems until they started talking to each other. But I feel like you had to be tiny to get into the crevices, to get into the cracks between those two worlds. Is that fine?
I think that's right. I think I had to get still. Like I think I had to be still, and I had to listen. I spent a good part of my life trying to like silence all the parts of myself that have been harmed. Like as a child, I was like, just be quiet, or aren't you also accountable? And there wasn't a lot of tenderness. There wasn't a lot of grace there. And when I opened the door for that tenderness, when I said, oh, I'm an adult who can take care, then suddenly just making that statement and like to myself and beginning to ask questions and to respond to those questions. I think it came from being still. And part of what I write about in the book, I went through a divorce, and the poems are not really about going through a divorce exactly. It's more like, what were the stories that kept me in the space, right? What were the narratives that kept me with my ex-wife?
Okay.
Right? How was I relating to her? And those stories were coming from my family and their dynamic, right? So then I was like I was in Western New York. I was by myself. It felt very much like a bit like exile. And I didn't know anybody. I was working at St. Bonaventure, and I just had to be still. There just like wasn't anything else to do, and the poems were coming, and I had lots of questions, and the only person I could really ask those questions to were me. Like I was the only person. Yeah. So I think like being still with myself and sort of turning in, like, I think maybe like I opened a few doors and how to say, I guess I walked through like the doors, right? So it's like, oh, like there are some big questions here, some big stories that I need to undo. How do I do that? How do I begin to do that?
was there a poem or a moment when you were working on sort of both worlds where you knew that those two worlds could come together?
Well, they had to come together.
Right? But I mean, in a book, you know.
I would say I don't know that there was a poem that did that for me exactly. I do think like in the Chapel of St. Mary's, sort of opened something up where I was there. The line that I wrote, I remember writing this line and learning something that I didn't know about myself, which is that I don't know how to believe in what I can't see. And as you pointed out, my vision is not very good. Like I pointed it out as you relayed back to me. Like my vision is not very good. And so that really does, it's like, I can only see like this far in front of me. So is that all I can believe? And I was like, is that right? Is that how I want to live? Right? What keeps me that close?
Yes.
And some of that's fear, and some of that's like, oh, I have to be small, or I have to be safe, or I have to sublimate myself so that other people can take what they need. And I think in the Chapel of St. Mary's kind of opened something up like around those issues. And I've been writing the poems that deal with the childhood trauma for like years.
Yeah.
You know, I think since I started writing.
Right.
But they changed when I became more tender with myself. You know?
One of the things that I feel, I don't know, but I remember reading, you wrote somewhere about growing up in LA, growing up in South Central, growing up in a violent neighborhood, and also having to negotiate. And I thought about this morning, having to negotiate the fact that your house was on the Bloods and Crips, right? Your house was in the Blood territory. Your grandmother lived in the Crips territory. I mean, maybe I'm a poet and I just sort of, no, seriously, because things that this does for me. So the story is you had to negotiate how to get from your house to your grandmother's house. You had to think of not wearing certain colors or not making certain gestures. And so be self-aware. You had to look, Donika, right here, even though you're talking about looking far and wide, in order to make that journey. And I thought, yes, all of those things she's talking about, the violence in that moment, but I'm also thinking about how your vision for words, how your vision on the page, how your muscle memory in that kind of way sharpened in an incredible way to be able to take Bloods and Crips, to be able to navigate those kinds of things safely. In that kind of way. I don't know if that sounds sort of far-reaching, but it's important to talk about, I think, because I find so many writers who are trying to like not look here, not look at what you have, but want something over there, and something is really with you if you just think that it's a power and not, you know, something less than. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. Like that, that level of self-awareness has served me in lots of situations. But I think it's also led to like a foreshortening of what feels possible, you know? And one of the things that I was trying, it's like when I was a kid, I couldn't imagine wearing red. Like there was just no way that was ever going to happen. Like in LA, even when we moved to Arkansas, no one ever wore, you know, like we were just like, so it was so ingrained that there were certain things that we could not do, even though we had moved out of that space.
Right.
And I think that to me does feel really connected with like the stories that I had carried, you know, even though I was far removed from those spaces that were no longer safe, I was still like acting as if I were in danger all the time, you know?
So in the book, if you read the book yet, if you haven't seen how the book is structured, one of the things I would love for you to talk about, being an epistolary girl myself, loving the letter, loving the dear, as a form in the book. When you write a letter, I was thinking about you're writing to somebody who's not in the room with you. You're writing in order to make the space between you and that other person smaller or less than. And so, can you talk a little bit about the epistolary poems in the collection?
I love what you just said about making that space between the person towards whom the letter is written, like smaller, right? As a kind, it's like the letter is a kind of is a kind of bridge.
Yes.
I love that. And I think I imagine the epistolary form as there's an audience, right? Someone's going to get it. And what I love about sending letters, and I have a few friends to whom I send letters, and it's great. I totally forget as soon as it's in the mail. I have no idea what I wrote. But in the case of the epistolary poems, those poems are almost all of them are located in the sections that are around the end of that deal with the end of the marriage.
Mm.
And I think this goes back to something I was saying earlier, where who could I talk to, right? Like there was no one actually to process this with, but the letter felt like hopeful, like I could sort of speak toward a person who I cared about, but who I could not talk to.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
But also to myself, right? Like there is much to me as they are, or like there is much to like I'm just thinking about that sort of like the veil is a bit thin between me and the speaker, but it is there nonetheless, right? Like a letter is also really shaped.
Yes.
Right? Like there's so much shape to it. There's so many things that have to be left out. Like I'm not sending, like a manuscript. Like they're also sonnet-ish.
Right? And right? The dear, from another time, from what, 19th century or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So I just I needed that space. And this also I think comes a little bit out of like therapy. Therapists are always like, write a letter, but don't send it. Like constantly. They're like, oh, it'll be so good. You write a letter, but don't send it. And so there are the poems that begin each section are like redactions from real letters.
Okay.
Which is different than like the other, like the poems that are like lineated and are just like the dear, like they're just like the epistolary poems. So there's like this dynamic too of like, things are being withheld from the reader, from the intended like recipient of the letter. So I don't know, I was thinking about like all of the ways that we shape for an audience what we want people to see.
Yeah.
And that felt right for like where I was in that process,
The question I'm about to ask you is a hard question for me, but I'm going to ask it anyway because I love what we have been making in our truth and our saying to each other over the years. You take such care in this book to illuminate your father's familial, societal desert. A lot of time, a lot of care, a lot. And I feel like I haven't felt that from the daughter of a man who has abused her, maybe since Lucille Clifton.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Though I don't think, and I think Miss Clifton might agree with me if I said this, and she was here. She is here. I think you go deeper. I feel like you swim farther into that desert in order to show in that way you are talking about shame and longing, just how far and wide it was in his life, or is in his life.
Mhm.
Can you talk about that, making sure that that's present in, you know, when you start talking about the really hard stuff,
Mhm.
it's present, it's there.
Mhm. So this is a great question. Thank you. Thank you for it. It was important to me to try to think about my dad as a person. And the way that like the speaker refers to the father is not as the father most of the time. It's like dad. That's what I call my dad. And that felt important, that sort of that closeness. My dad is an incredibly charming, very hardworking, awful person. He's complex. And there are so many ways that I don't know him or understand his story. I have like these like little pieces of things that I've been holding on to because he and I don't talk. We don't talk to each other because it doesn't feel good to me to do that. But in the exploration of the book, there had been a story that I had been telling myself about the abuse. That involved like being partially responsible. Like I was partially responsible. But also I was just confused. I was like, how does a person make this choice?
Right.
What are the things that lead to this choice? And it felt important for me to investigate through the poems what I understood that might reveal something about the choice.
Right.
Right. And I ended up where I had started, which is that he's an awful person. But poetry, I was talking about this with Melissa this morning. I was thinking about our conversation last night. It's like the book feels, I think when people read it, it will feel like pretty autobiographical in a lot of ways, but it's not a story about me or like my experiences. It's like, here are the experiences that are connected to an old story. Poetry helps me unravel them. So if anything, it's like an autobiography of thinking and feeling.
Yes.
Not the abuse, not the end of the relationship even, but just like, how did I end up here? What do I want to take with me? How can I figure out what to leave? What can I leave behind in this? You know? And what do I want to leave behind? Is there anything I want to carry forward? And so it was really helpful to go to do that inquiry through poetry.
Yeah.
To spend some time thinking about what I knew, so that when I got on the other side, I was like, right. So I've done my due diligence. He's a complicated person. He's had a hard life. Nonetheless, this is not a choice that I understand.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I feel a lot better in some ways, but in other ways, I still got to carry it, you know?
Well, you know what Tony Bambara said, right? I mean, this is a perfect moment to say that quote that she asked the world. She asks us, she says, "Are you sure, sweetheart, that you want to be well?"
Mm.
And then she says, "It's a lot of weight to be well."
Mm-hmm.
And I felt that quote as I read through this collection. I felt the tininess of Donika, the great fierceness of Donika, moving through all of these passageways and all of these waterfalls for us. So we would have this mapping, right? This cartography.
Mm-hmm.
Because to me, that's what you're doing. To me, you're bestiary, you were, but this one is a deeper map that happens because I think you got tinier.
Mm-hmm.
Best way.
Mm-hmm.
Into those places where you had to get in order to say those things that you had to say. And so I wanted to read that because I've been thinking about that quote all the time. And I say it to people who are not willing to do the work, who are say those hard things and show those moments where we all need to see them as human beings. So I feel like you are a poet of your emotional time, and that you map it beautifully, so beautifully. So I thank you for that.
Well, thank you. Thank you for seeing that, for seeing me. I really appreciate it. My friend Carlicia is here, and she and I have had this conversation many times where we're like, wouldn't it be nice to just go back before like the processing and sort of being like, oh, I need to like pay attention to all of these things that happen. I need to understand. It was like we were so far away. I was so far away from myself. I won't speak for her, but I was so far away from myself. And I was like numb. And now like being like on the other side of that, being well, it's a lot of feelings like all the time. It's just like being present like in my body like at a much more often.
One says I have a lot of feelings. That's what they right?
I have so many feelings.
Right. And then you have this, you're talking about being tiny, and maybe after this comment we'll let some people in some more questions. But I love this tininess goes, runs throughout the book, the homunculus, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then that quote, that beautiful quote where you say, "Fathers are for children, and I was never a child, only a smaller image of myself." You're consistent. You really, really are consistent. That's why the work is so good, because the truth is always there. It changes view on it. The truth is always there. So do you see a question, Donika?
I don't see any questions yet. But if y'all want to put questions in the ask a question box, that would be great. Be happy to.
Yeah.
Can I just, while folks are thinking about questions, the homunculus?
Yes.
Okay, first, I love that word. I love the word homunculus. I'm like, what is that? That's a strange word and a strange idea. And I remember reading about, like, that was one way that science is like, it's a wobbly field for me. But like, was it like medieval scientists this is how reproduction happens, right? And like inside the seed, the man's seed is just like a tiny version. It's just like, well, what? That haunted me. There was something haunting about that. I remember talking with my students about it in a gender studies class and just laughing. I was like, what was happening? That they were like, oh, right, so there's just like a teeny, teeny, tiny little man. All right. So, okay, there are questions.
Okay.
So you speak about how stillness was the pathway to this work. Could you speak to what it means to cultivate a practice of stillness? And Nikky, I would love if you, because I feel like you have stillness too. Like that's important for you. I don't like being busy. That's like step one. So I like to be still. And a thing that happened, that's taken some time to happen, like maybe since my mom got sick in 2008, is I am more at the center of my life than I have ever been. Like I don't have kids. The men in my family are usually at the center of everyone's life in my family. Like the men and the children are important, but I'm just a little bit disconnected from my family in that way. So I'm more often at the center. And so I'm interested in what I think and how I came to think what I think.
Yes.
And I spend a lot of time thinking about that. And that requires like being still. Like I do my best thinking when like it's summer and I don't like I say no to lots of things because it's more important to be still. So I value it, and I'm very fortunate that I have a life that the circumstances of my life now afford a deeper measure of stillness than has been true in the past. We're in a place with like really remarkable windows. Like there's a tree situation outside right now that like I can't even, I wish I could show y'all, but I spend a lot of time looking out the window.
Yes. Yes.
You know? Like sitting in the front yard. My neighbors think I'm so weird because I sit in the front yard and not in the back.
I don't know, and I don't think people understand how noisy the world is.
Mm-hmm.
I don't, and I feel like the second thing they might not understand is how it impacts how you think, how you feel, how you see, how you write, how you cry, what you hear, what dreams come to you. If you sit in front of electronic stuff, I've been on for a year. I've been, putting a book out in the world. Yesterday, I got my grades in. I woke up at 5 o'clock this morning. I said somebody is going to come by in a police car and put me in the back seat because I'm in my front yard, no shoes on. It rained last night.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to call the quiet back to me. This is not something that will just happen. It's like you say, you have to want it, you have to seek it, and you have to not be afraid of what your mind or heart will tell you when you get there. Because it's not all quiet. Sometimes the stuff that it says to you is really loud. So, cultivating that kind of quiet. My summer, just like yours, I have one more event. I said yes to you, and I said yes to one more thing. And then it's like, so I know what I sound like when I have been quiet for like a 2-week period, when I've been just silent like that. And I know what it sounds like when I'm on Zoom every other day.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you have to want it, and I think you have to also know what it sounds like when you hear it,
Mm-hmm.
and want to bring it back into your life. Yeah.
And it can be scary. I like when I talk to my students about slowing down and being quiet and just like saying no to things, taking the email off the phone,
Right.
Like taking
Right.
like social media break, like just like the holding some space. I sense from them a kind of anxiety, because it's like, well, like then what? And it's like, right, then you.
Right.
Then you with you, and if I don't know, I think if we're lucky, we get to have that time, but what comes can also, as you said, like be loud and a little bit scary. So Melissa talks about, I think like in her second book, in Abandon Me, she talks about like inviting the emotions in, but it's like once they're in, they're there. It's like they're like really rude guests. They don't leave. Right. Like, the party's over. I actually just wanted these two to come. It's like everyone shows up. which is great, but also it's like it can be a lot. But I don't know. I feel grateful that I've been able to, that I can value that, and also hold it.
I've been the year has been one of course, prayerfulness for the world and people being impacted by COVID and losing jobs and the long list of things.
Mm-hmm.
Then also my little self has stowed away and loved it, loved not having to go and be social and be out in the world in that way. And so that's been a tiny little treasure in a world, on fire.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You have another question there?
There are a couple of other questions here. So I think this is Eric. I think that's how one might say this. Say this name. So I'm hoping I'm not saying that incorrectly. Can we hear more about how you view the relationship of love and renunciation? Yes. So I think of love as a practice. I experience love as a practice, how we show up for people, how we can show up as our best selves or whole selves or just like realist selves. And there are situations where that is not safe to be whole, to be best, right? And when I think about the title of this book, what is being renounced is a pattern that I had. So again, this goes back to the story that I was saying earlier. In my family, men, boys, and children are at the center. And men can act, generally speaking, with a certain measure of impunity if they are providing for their families. The sin is not providing for the family, but if one is like bringing one's check home, it's like the bar is very low. It's buried in the ground. But men stay at the center. And when I was married, I just replicated that with the person I was married to. I just put her at the center. And she didn't want to be at the center. Like, she didn't want that. I think she found it like very stressful. It's almost like being on a pedestal. Like, I don't know that she felt necessarily like a whole person, or that I was being a whole person in that space. So part of what was being renounced were ways of loving that erased the self, right? And what I hope is on the other side of that are ways of loving that are full, right? Where people can show up fully and wholly themselves. Like, that's what I love about my friends. Like, my friends are amazing. They're super weird, just like very strange people. And I love, like, I just know where I am with them all the time. I like who they are all the time, even when they're like going through it. And they like, we don't have to change with each other. Mm-hmm. And in my sort of formative experiences, that change was required. That sort of that reduction of self was required. So I think of like renouncing that reduction of self in favor of fullness. But that needed an investigation. That needed like deep inquiry, you know. And I like what you said, Nikki, about mapping. Like, I'm gonna steal that. I was like, Nikki. Well, I won't steal. I'm gonna cite you. Nikky Finney said. That's what I'm gonna say.
Yours. It's yours because that's what you've done. You have, you know. For me.
Wow, that's dope. What is the backstory behind the cycle of poems entitled "Dear"? It was just that letter writing practice, and it was definitely sort of a 19th century move to have "Dear" and then the dash, because in some ways it I don't know. There were some strategies that I used that I realized later were about withholding from the reader, but also withholding to protect the speaker. It's like, I feel so tenderly towards the speaker who is doing this work. And by thinking about the speaker as a speaker and not as me, that created room also for me to be tender with myself. Like, I wanted to be careful with this person or this figure where I was like, let's go into these spaces. Let's go into these small sort of scary spaces together. I'm right here. I got you. You know, like, there's just like I was in the position of like sort of shaping how far it went. But the speaker is not, again, like, not exactly me, but it's like that sort of, I've been trying to think about the speaker a little bit. And I think it's a little bit like a documentary film where it feels true, but so much is left on the cutting floor, right? So there's like the speaker's like the camera and like sort of shapes like what we can see. Does that sound right? Does that?
But you would not be able you need to cut and keep what you need to keep had you not been focused on getting well, on the things that you had to do one-on-one with another person who was on the journey with you to heal. Because you could see in dimension, Donika. You could levitate above being the girl in the room with the unpainted door and no doorknob. And you could show someone else what that meant, what that's like, the fear of that. You know, that anybody can come into your life at any moment and do anything to you. I mean, I feel like if you hadn't done work in those 15 years, we could have never seen that scene so cleanly and so clearly, with maybe things on the cutting floor that will be picked up maybe or gathered or, you know, you still have, but we didn't need them for this.
Yes. Yeah. It was work that I did not want to do. But I think I was ready, you know, like I think that when I sort of reached or like sort of, I remember I was working through the Courage to Heal, the workbook and the book. And one of the suggested activities was like, write a letter to yourself. And I was like, I'm not going to do that. And then I was like, maybe I can. And the writing is so small. It's like it's teeny tiny. And it's on a tiny sheet of paper. And I was like, hi, little tiny friend. And what answered back was just like a little kid who was like, hey, I'm freaked out. And I was like, oh, whoa. So as it turns out, we're safe. I got this. And that sort of practice, I think, with myself, I had to like start exercising that tenderness towards myself so that you're absolutely right. I could then practice that with the speaker. And my hope is that readers do feel that care and feel that carefulness, you know, that tenderness, that we're only going as far as we need to go and not any farther. Like we're not going past what feels safe, you know.
But we care as readers that you say at the end of I'm speaking for myself. I care as a reader that I know you got up. I care as a reader that you say, about time to get a hammer. I thought, about time to get a nail and a saw. You didn't stop with, you know, that we get to that other place that we need to get to. People need to know they can get to that other place. And this book is a measuring tool for that. I really think so.
Thank you for saying that. That is my hope. I just like there have been so many poems and poets who have done that for me that helped me get to the other side, you know, that reassured me that I was not alone. I think that does feel wild is like, you know, it's like getting divorced is hard. But like in the context of the book, it's actually, it's like, oh yeah, divorce. You know, it's like it sort of scales some things too, right? I don't know. It was important to me to show that other side, to get somewhere that was in a space of possibility. Like that felt really important to me in the structure of the book, because I'm here.
Yes.
You know, and still figuring stuff out, but with much more gentleness, much more tenderness,
right.
And I'm happier for it. You know.
Yeah. So. You seem more happy than the last time I saw you.
I feel very, it's, you know, the sun's out now. The winter was a little brutal here in Iowa City. It was kind of a lot. But I feel happy. I feel happy in my friendships. The members of my family with whom I'm connected are like, that all feels good. And like, that feels a lot healthier than it's felt in the past. And I don't know, I got a good job, fun students. Some of them are here. So maybe I'll ask this other, I don't know if other people have questions, but there are a couple more in here. So Carvel, hi Carvel. You've talked about how you've had to grow and change in order to write this. I'm wondering how the act of completing and releasing this work has grown or changed you. I'm reassured by process. You know, like that I don't have a lot of goals, but I do like doing the work, you know, like I just want to be like, so I was really anxious, the whole like first part of this year, like before the book came out. So like, you know, just starting from January until like right this very moment. But when I sent Jeff the book, that was in January of 2019. And they took it January of 2019. And Jeff was like, 2021? I was like, excellent. I love it. Longer? Let me know. Because the work felt important, but it also felt scary. It felt really vulnerable. And, but in the process of like working on edits for the book, responding to questions, I don't know, like I feel clearer in relationship to myself and to my experiences and what I hold in that. And that has been a gift for me. And honestly, like I love reading some of these poems. So I mean, I love reading. These are good poems, in my opinion. I really like my own work, obviously. Anyone who has heard me talk knows that this is true. But some of the poems in this book, I love reading them like out loud. Like it is just like so pleasurable. And that feels like interestingly fraught. You know, like it's like to sort of see the art sort of rub up against or be in friction or contrast with like the content. But sometimes I read the poems and I just get like a little chill. I'm like, oh. So I've moved deeper into that space is what I'll say. I'm like enjoying my own work, even though it's hard. Nikky, do you have this feeling about your own work? Do you get? I'm curious about other writers, like if they're like these
Totally.
so good.
I love. I tell folks all the time. I tell my students all the time that I've been writing a long time, and the thing that keeps me here is surprise. The surprise of beginning in one place and being way down the road in another, and not knowing how I got there, but there is a map, which is why I love cartography and mapping, which is why I keep all my drafts and look, oh, that was there. You know, and so that kind of wonder at the work, students of writing, work of writing is the blossom, is the bloom, is the orchid of it all. And so, but that's why, Donika, you can be as quiet and as interior you are, and also say, oh, I like my work. Work. Oh, yes, I have worked on this work that I like so much.
Mm-hmm.
We have to be able to do that. I just sent a poem off and I was reading it 1 o'clock in the morning. I said, wait, let me read that poem one more time. Ooh, and I got to this. There are 3 words that are triple syllable, and it works. I don't know. I've never done anything like that before, right? And I woke up and then I fell asleep kind of saying those 3. It's crazy. But I love the words so much. And I had never heard them in my ear or had them inside of me. They were just tumbling around. And so that's why I
know. It feels so good. It feels so good. It feels like magic. It's like this sort of like something happens, like what you said about like starting one place, maybe intending to go somewhere and ending up. It's like, how did I get over here? Why am I talking about magma? It's like, I'm talking about magma. That's just what it is, you know? It's like, obviously I need to watch some videos about like how a star explodes. That feels really important.
I mean, and you're wearing the queen of that on over your lungs and
Just Octavia Butler.
yes, right.
Philadelphia Printwork. They have some really excellent sweatshirts. I have this in a t-shirt as well. I'm just like into it. This one makes me really happy.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
I'm so glad. I suspected as much, Nikky Finney, that you loved it. So okay. So maybe just these 3 questions that are here.
Okay.
Might be good. So Omatara, I miss you. Melissa and I were just saying how we miss seeing you, like at readings, just like, getting a hug. Okay, so the work you do is so important and can be taxing. Also, I imagine that some of this book was written during a tumultuous time. Can you share any tips, rituals that speak to how you take care of yourself as you enter the process of sitting down to write, as well as how you release yourself from that space to get on with your other work? That's a great question. I don't have rituals as far as I know, but I do have some grounding techniques that are helpful. And the big one is reminding myself that I'm safe. That is, I'm just writing a poem. Like that's actually it's like just bring it down a little bit, because the work can be like really was really triggering at times. I remember when I finished the series about the abuse and sort of working through that, I went to sleep. I just like fell asleep like immediately. I wrote like the last word and I was like, I was just like knocked out. But the grounding work of just like, I'm in a space where I am safe. I am an adult. I am in like the situation I'm writing in is not the situation I experienced. Like that, those reminders are really helpful. And I can always just stop writing, and I was working at that time too, really closely with my therapist, because I knew I needed a lot of extra support when I was working on those poems. So it was a combination of, just like the things that I've learned how to do, but also just knowing that if I needed to like call my therapist, like I could go in and see her whenever I needed to. So Joe asks, truly startling reading, Donika. Thank you. How do you re-enter these potential triggers as you read aloud, and how do you set it down? Also, what, if anything, do you hope the reader will set down or carry more lightly? So the first part of that question is, I actually, as I was saying earlier, get really excited about the poems as poems. Like, just like as works of art, as a thing that I made, where it just like creates there's like a little bit of distance, right? Because again, it's something that's been shaped. It's not like raw experience. And what I hope the reader takes away is, well, there are 2 things. The first one is that my experiences are not extraordinary. They're like incredibly regular. And the experiences that I'm writing about are incredibly regular experiences. But I hope that readers who have experienced like childhood sexual abuse know that they aren't alone. Like that did so much work for me, like to just destigmatize something in my brain, like just like I'm clear now on like it not being my fault. Like that feels like crystal clear. But on the other side, it's like, but I'm also not alone in my experience. And that makes me deeply sad. It's like, it's incredibly sad. And also is just true. So then like, how can we take care of each other? How can we move through spaces together without carrying that shame? I just hope it sort of lightens up the shame a little bit, because there is so much of it. So those are my hopes. All right. It's gotten All right. So I think, Nikki, there's a question for you in the chat, but I don't think that's a question for us to chat about.
Okay. I
So,
trust you.
I don't know. I hope that if folks get the book, folks read the book. I hope that you take care of yourselves in that experience. You know, it's a little bit intense. Also, the thing that I hope people don't take away is that, like, I don't like hiking. There are a lot of poems with hiking. I don't like to hike. And I feel like that's really important to say, because it sounds like I like hiking and I don't. So that was a mistake. Because there's intensity, there's like a kind of intensity. Like, I'm sorry. What, Nikki? It's true. I don't. I like to walk, but like to go up, I don't want to do, ma'am.
I just want to say, maybe this is in closing. I don't know. Are we near that moment? Yeah, I think
so. Yeah.
Because I've been teaching writing a long time. I've been teaching in the classroom, undergraduates, graduate students. We talk a lot about structure and technique and writers and language, and let me just keep going, enjambment, in words, metaphor, you know what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
What we don't talk about, Donika, is us.
Mm-hmm.
I ask my students, who do you love? Who's loving you? Who sees you? Who will take care of your work if something happens to you? Who set their coffee cup on your new poem? Do you understand that in this world, you need to, as you make a stanza, make a poem, make a book, you need to make a space to do the work and be whole and healthy, and surround yourself with people who love you and see you and weren't there when you were born, but are there for you now. We don't talk enough about this. And therefore, sometimes we get to the metaphor and the simile and the book and the line and the enjambment, because over here, we have not done the work.
Yeah.
So there's work here and there's work here. And one of the things that you've given us tonight is the understanding of how critical, how beautiful, how important, how essential. In order to get to this, you have to get here. So we thank you.
I'm gonna run away.
Hey, you cannot run away.
I cannot run away. Thank you, Nikki.
Yeah.
I could not have imagined having this conversation with anyone else. There are the many ways that I'm grateful to you for how you've shown up for me, and like there's like the gratitude is enormous, verges on sublime. It's so big, but the way that you are in the world, like, I don't know, it creates space for me to imagine, like, doing that kind of work and imagine what's possible, like in bringing those parts together, doing this work and doing the craft work. So I'm thank you. This was so good. Thank you so much for taking, like, I know you're tired. you've been doing the most, like, y'all need to get you need to get all the books, but then also the new book is like, I mean, again, all the books, but that new book is so beautiful. It's just like, it's a beautiful artifact, like us, like, and then like the work itself just feels like it feels like good soil. Do you know what I mean? Like, so that's what I would say about that.
Kind of like a good hike up a mountain, like that.
No, not a hike, not a mountain. Like, can we go walk on like the prairie, do a little prairie walk, a little flat?
Can I just say one thing? I have to say this about Charis. 1981, I moved to Atlanta. I need a holy place. I need a bookstore. I find this lesbian, feminist, womanist, holy place in a little place called 5 Points. And I go, Charis, I thank you for being here for the last 45 years, for taking us in, for showing us how we can walk into an establishment and feel safe and see ourselves and fight racism and sexism and homophobia and all the others. And so I just want to say thank you, Charis, for hosting us tonight. And we have loved being with you.
Well, thank you both so much. This has been such a gift. The comments are full of gratitude, and feeling the nourishment and feeling the love for both of you tonight. So there's not much more to say except I dropped the links to all of Nikky's books in the chat. So please, Heartwood is being re-released, so you can pre-order that, which is amazing. If you don't own Heartwood, get that. And this teal link at the bottom of the screen is where you can buy the Renunciations from Charis. We would love for you to get that from us. The last thing it is my job and honor to do is to remind folks that Charis is a nonprofit and we're primarily individually donor sponsored. So if you have $5, $10 to throw our way, it really does help us do the work that we want to do in the world, and it is how we have survived for 46 years. So thank you for whatever you were able to do to support us for that work. So we know this book, Donika, is going to continue to be a gift to so many, a healing gift, and a gift of demonstrating how you love yourself as much as other people love you. So thank you for reminding us that that is a valuable thing that an artist should do for oneself. So I really love this conversation and just learned so much from both of y'all. So everybody stay safe and well, and hope to see you soon.
Thank y'all so much. Thank you, Nikki. Thank you, ER.
Bye, you guys. Thank you, Charis.